Sometime around late 1300s, tarot cards were created. At first, they were used for games and amusement among the aristocratic set in Europe. Then, during subsequent centuries, they took on a deeper meaning as a way to divine the future. We're going to take a look at how tarot is used today with my special guest, author and tarot expert, Sasha Graham. Sasha has used her interest in tarot to write several books, including Llewellyn's complete book of the Rider Waite Smith Tarot and her own tarot decks, including her new one, the Dark Wood Tarot. Welcome to the Dream Power Show, Sasha.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, it is my pleasure. I'm so excited to be talking to you about tarot and actually be asking you the very simple question: why should I be interested in tarot?
Well, I think tarot is one of the most fun things and one of the most versatile things you could ever kind of have. It's an innately magical device. I always call tarot the gateway to the metaphysical arts because you can use it for so many different things, like straight up divination. You can apply it to astrology, Kabbalah, numerology, color work, dream work, shadow work. It's really like this marvelous device that acts like a mirror for who you are, and you can pretty much use it for just about anything you want.
Isn't it wonderful that cards can do so much for a person? But I just have a very curious question because all tarot decks include the same number of cards, the same card names. Why are there so many different decks?
Well, first, I want to say that the reason that every tarot deck has the same innate structure, which is the four suits and then a major arcana, so the minor arcana and the major arcana, this is really what separates a tarot deck from an oracle deck. And there really is a difference between the two when you really start working with it. It's the structure of a tarot deck that allows all of these other kind of modalities to be laid on top of it. So that's there for a very specific reason. It's very concise. And that's not to say that oracle decks can't, of course, be used as well. It's a different system. It's a different kind of animal. I think you can go a lot deeper in a lot of different ways with the tarot. But the reason there's so many different decks out there and continue to be, because we've seen such an explosion, especially in the last decade. I mean, pick a topic, a subject, an aesthetic, and you will find a tarot deck, right? It's because you can really lay anything you want on top of it. It has this kind of mythic structure, and so, like any good story, the elements are all there. You lay what you want on top of it, and it's really phenomenal because as a beginning reader, you want to find a deck that will keep bringing you back again and again. You want to be kind of seduced and beguiled. So there's really a tarot deck out there for everybody's taste. So we're quite fortunate to be living in a time with such variety.
So if you were, say, in a store and looking at a bunch of different decks, you pretty much go to the one that you just feel something about. And that's
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, your personal impulse and attraction to a particular deck of cards is always the first instinct that you want to follow. So, and it's actually the same thing with reading the cards. What's that first thing that pulls your attention? That's even more important than what the card traditionally means. So you want to move towards what calls you toward a tarot deck the same way you want to go toward what calls you in your life in any circumstance, right? You want to be following that inner impulse. So yeah, so you should definitely purchase a deck that seems really fascinating to you. And then if you really want to create sort of a solid practice, it's a wonderful idea to get the Rider Waite Smith deck, only because the Rider Waite Smith deck, which came out in 1909, and that's the deck most people are familiar with, lays the groundwork for a lot of the symbolism you find in most decks today, which tend to be Rider Waite clones, which is kind of building upon the symbolism you see in there. So yeah, the first thing you should get is the one that you're sort of like, wow, what is it? And sparks your imagination. And then to move deeper, you should get a copy of the Rider Waite.
yeah, so that would keep you interested
Hmm.
and keep going. It's almost like
Yeah,
that
yeah.
feeling, that energy that comes from it. That
Yeah, exactly. Because, 78 cards can be overwhelming to learn, and oftentimes your appetite and kind of haste and excitement to read can become overwhelmed by all of these things to memorize. So when you have a deck that just keeps drawing you back again and again, I think that's really a game changer in terms of like diving deep into the tarot, because it really becomes it does become like a dreamscape in which you move into every single day. And so you want that to be filled with the things that kind of set your imagination on fire. Um, yeah.
why are some of the cards called the major arcana and the minor arcana? Does it mean they're more important than other cards?
So what's really interesting, when tarot first was out and around, and you were talking earlier about how it came out in the 14th, or the oldest deck goes back to the 14th century, and even older than that, because there's actually a Spanish philosopher who was living in Majorca who was talking about tarot as far back as 1200. So it's a really ancient set of cards. And so what we're talking about when we're looking at the major and the minor arcana is a visual language. So we have to remember that back then, this is pre-printing press, books were not available. The general public was not literate, So the way that the church communicated was visually. So when you look back at these older decks, the Visconti deck, the Marseille deck, what you're really looking at are archetypal imagery that the churches, European churches, use to communicate their ideas. And so that's what you find in the major arcana. The major arcana are these like big kind of essential otherworldly ideas, like the lover, the star, the sun, the moon, the world, right, which is kind of this nirvana kind of heaven that we can all kind of aspire to. So these can be considered our soul cards when they turn up in our readings, these major life points, these like big milestones that we really want to pay attention to. But that being said, the minor arcana, which pretty much aligns with the regular suit of playing cards, really speaks more to our day-to-day things that we do, like here and there. So I always say something in the minor arcana, like the Five of Cups, might indicate you being stood up for your date, for this like guy that you're, and he stands you up. That's like a Five of Cups issue. But the Tower card represents the last time someone stands you up for a date, because you just won't have that anymore, right? So that's major as opposed to a minor issue.
Mm. Okay, so now you have a deck in front of you. How do you use the deck to do a reading?
So it depends. So tarot is entirely dependent on who you are and how you're using it. And that's true of when you go and get readings as well, because you really wind up getting more of the personality of the reader. Which is just a good thing to keep in mind when you're shopping around for a good tarot reading. But how you do a reading, well, you have to decide. Really, that's the first place for you as a reader. You're going to say, okay, am I going to utilize this reading to look into the future in a predictive, divinatory way, which is traditionally the way that tarot has been understood? Or am I going to do this reading to kind of look at my options and say, okay, this is where things are. What can I do to get X, Y, and Z? So when you're sitting down with your tarot cards, you're in the driver's seat. You get to decide what kind of a reading you're going to do. And then all of your questions and then information springs from that source.
So when you do a reading, do you ask a question first and then seek to get the answer?
Yeah, so if you're reading cards for yourself, and I think for anybody who wants to use a deck of cards, and this applies for oracle cards as well as tarot cards, one of the greatest things you can do is just sit down in the morning, kind of clear your mind, and ask a question. Ask a question, something as simple as, what do I need to know today? Or what should I look for today? Or what's going to help me have the best day possible? This is such a beautiful thing, right? Because it just sets you, it clears your mind first thing in the morning, and it kind of broadens your horizon, and then you sit there sort of with like a couple space, a little bit of breath, and then you flip a card and see what information comes to you. So it's really helpful to ask a question. Now, if you're reading for another person, then it becomes really fun because you can ask them or help them form a question if they have one. And a lot of times, like if you're practicing, your friends will definitely have like romance, family questions. But it can also be so much fun to lay out the cards and just tell the person what you see. And then find out how they resonate with what it is that you see. So you can use a question or you don't have to use a question. And you can also pull cards just to kind of take the temperature of the energy of your day. So there's a lot of different ways you can go.
And I understand it's also a difference between whether the card is right side up or upside down, has a different meaning. So,
Right, right. So when a card appears upside down, that's considered a reversal. And again, just sort of when you're starting out, it's up to you as the reader to decide whether or not you're going to use a reversal. So if you're first beginning, like if you're already trying to like memorize 78 different meanings of the cards, if you add reversals in, that might just make your head explode. So like, go slow, go easy. In fact, if you're just starting out, just reading with the major arcana is a great idea, and add cards as you go. The most important thing is to stay open, because fear of being like stupid kind of shuts down a reading for yourself. So reversals, if you choose to work with them, you can decide if it's going to affect the meaning of the card. You can choose not to read, and I often do not use the reversed meaning. But if you decide to work with a reversal, it can mean the opposite of a card's meaning. It can indicate a blockage of that card's energy. But then that's wonderful, because if you get a reversed card and it signals a blockage in your energy, you can choose to turn it right side up as a magical act, sort of as opening up that energy. So it's a first step towards releasing that energy. You can use reversals in a multi-card spread that become part of the pattern. And so that's interesting. Numbers and reversals can really indicate the flow of the narrative and the story that comes through a large spread. And reversals can also, depending on the deck you're using, can become a part of the visual that you have your own interpretation for. So really sky's the limit, but it pays to be really kind of open and just decide ahead of time what the reversal is going to mean for you. It's better not to decide after you're in the reading, if that makes sense.
okay. Well, I always like to see examples so my listeners can get a taste of how something works in practice. So,
Okay.
for tarot, can you give me an example of how a reading had an effect on either you or one of your clients?
The most extraordinary things that happens when you really move into an active tarot practice, which means that you are reading for yourself or others on a regular basis, is that you start to understand your own intuition and psychic ability. And what's interesting about that is that the trust in the cards spills out into your trust into all of your other decisions that you make. So I can give you an example of a moment when I was really excited about something and I was hoping it was all going to work out. And it was like this complicated thing where a lot of stuff had to fall into place. And I can remember pulling cards without attachment, without emotional attachment to the outcome. And I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that what I was aiming for was going to happen. And not only that it was going to happen, but that it was the right thing. If we want to talk about readings I've done for another person, sometimes as a tarot reader, one of the best things you can do is step back and just let the information flow through like a channel. And I recently was doing a reading for a dear friend of mine who was having all this information came through about her grandfather, and it was really about the ancestor work of behavior she was engaging in, feelings she was having that were not at all hers. This was inherited stuff from her grandfather, and it had to do a lot with darkness and self harm and negativity. And I could just see by the cards, and I just knew that it wasn't her. It was like an inherited PTSD. And using the cards, kind of this like a recipe came up for what she needed to do in order to kind of regenerate that energy. So it wound up, just based on the cards that came up, that she needed to do a ritual outside and kind of open the ground with a knife and put in like a divining rod to let the energy move from him back into the earth so that it could be regenerated. And after she performed that, she just talks about the greater ease with which she's greeting her daily life. So yeah, that's a really good example of, and that's also a really good reminder. Sometimes
How can people find out more about you and your work?
they can go to my website at sashagraham.com. They can also find me on Instagram. I'm very active on Instagram at Sasha Tarot Diva. I'm a Llewellyn author, so you can find me on the Llewellyn website. I'm also a Lo Scarabeo author, although they don't list their authors. And you can find me on Facebook, Sasha Graham 1 on Facebook. And if you go to my website, sashagraham.com, you can also sign up for my newsletter, and then you'll always be alerted to special classes or new books coming out. I have a new book coming out, The Magic of Tarot, at the end of this year.
We've been speaking with tarot deck expert Sasha Graham.